Hi guys, I recently played an over-the-board game that I'd like to share with you. It was part of a regional team event where we play in teams of 8 with 12 teams in a round-robin format. The tournament is spread throughout the season, with one round played almost every second Sunday. This was round 3, and we were the home team playing against one of the weaker teams. I was playing on board 1. The time control was 1.5 hours for 40 moves, with a 30-second increment. My opponent was an older gentleman with an international rating of roughly 2,000. I don't usually prepare specifically for expected opponents, and I just chose from my regular repertoire. That Sunday, I felt like playing the English opening, so I started with C4. He responded with E5, which at my level of play I'm usually quite happy with. C4 isn't that common, and it's interesting how many players automatically respond with E5, even though they typically play D4 with white to avoid the Sicilian. Somehow, they don't mind playing the same position a tempo down. Still, there's nothing inherently wrong with e5. I played g3 next, followed by g6. Bishop g2, bishop g7, all pretty standard stuff. After knight c3, knight e7, I opted for the Botvinnik system, characterized by the move e4. It's a system opening that you can play as white regardless of black's setup. After castling kingside and knight e2, white is ready to castle, and black usually plays knight c6, d6, and perhaps bishop e6 or f5. However, my opponent felt creative and played b6, which immediately looked dubious to me. I castled before making any central moves. He played bishop b7, giving me a choice between d3 and d4. While I felt confident d4 was slightly better, d3 was still good, and I wanted to stick to the Botvinnik system. Besides, letting black's light-squared bishop face a wall of pawns couldn't be wrong. After d3, my opponent took a long think and played c6, which I hadn't expected at all. This move just feels wrong. The b8 knight has nowhere to go, and the light-squared bishop is completely shut down. While he obviously wants to play d5, if I don't react correctly, his pieces might come alive. What would you play here? There are multiple good moves, but I thought d4 was too strong to pass up. It might seem that I lost a tempo by playing d3 then d4, but I'd rather play this position with black's pawn on c6 rather than c7. He should probably protect the pawn with d6, admit he's significantly worse, and try to hang on. Instead, after e takes d4, knight takes d4. He spent considerable time trying to make d5 work, but it simply doesn't. For example, after d5, e takes d5, c takes d5. Bishop g5 pins the e7 knight devastatingly. The d5 pawn is also pinned, and I'll win it next move. He can't unpin the knight with f6 because of the knight fork on e6. To complete development, he played knight a6. I responded with bishop f4, aiming at the weak d6 square. I could also capture his knight if he ever tries to support d5 from c7. My plan was clear. Double up on the d file and win the backward d7 pawn. After knight c5, threatening knight e6, I played bishop d6 to fix the d7 pawn and avoid trades. I didn't want to exchange pieces because he had so little space. He went knight e6, and here I made my only real mistake of the game. The computer suggests trading knights, which I hadn't seriously considered. I was reluctant to repair his backward d7 pawn after knight takes e6, d takes e6. Here's the computer's suggested sequence: e5, rook e8, rook c1, knight f5, b4, knight takes d6, e takes d6, rook b8, c5. At this point, white clearly has an advantage with the strong protected pass pawn on d6, while black has a terrible bishop on b7 that must stay there to protect c6. However, I didn't realize that black simply had no better options, and I still find this sequence difficult to understand. Instead, I played knight e2 to avoid trades and free up the d file. He played the expected rook e8, the only way to deal with the annoying d6 bishop. After queen d2, knight c8, I retreated the bishop to a3 to prevent trading his poor c8 knight for my strong bishop. He played c5, which I anticipated. While this shut down my bishop temporarily, it could easily re-enter the game via b2 after b3. His d7 pawn, however, would remain permanently backward. Though it might appear he has an outpost for his pieces on d4, he can't maintain a piece there. For instance, if knight d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, then knight b5, and I break through on the d file. After rook d1, bishop c6, protecting d7, I played f4. This gives me the option of playing e5 or f5 later. For example, if knight d4, e5, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, black can't support the knight on d4. He played d6, and I responded with b3 to reactivate my bishop. After knight d4, bishop b2, everything was protected, so there was no need to trade. Better to just improve pieces. Black played f5, trying to destroy my center, but the simple e takes f5 was clearly best. Perhaps he wanted to take on f5 with the knight and give me an unstoppable royal fork on e3. But he missed that I have queen d5 check, winning the rook on a8. He couldn't just take on f5 with the pawn either, since I would take the knight on d4, and bishop takes d4 would no longer be check, allowing me to continue with knight b5, breaking through the d file. He tried to muddy the waters with queen e7. But after knight takes d4, c takes d4, bishop takes d4 was slightly better, but still completely lost for him. Knight d5, he had nothing better than to trade queens on e2. After rook f2, rook takes f2, king takes f2, g takes f5, I finally won a pawn with bishop takes d4. After bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, king f7. The resulting endgame is completely lost for black. Not only am I a pawn up, but his pieces are tangled, mine are active, and he has 4 pawn islands against my 2. Can you spot the best continuation here? After knight c7, rook b8, and rook d5, black is losing another pawn. He played rook b7 and resigned after knight b5 because he couldn't protect both pawns. King e6 would fail to knight d4 check. So that's it. I think it was a pretty good game, and I wanted to share it with you. If you'd like to see more games like this, or perhaps learn more about the Botvinnik system, please leave a comment. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.